Chainsaw History Time.
I had no interest, but I do have interest in seeing Beetlejuice. So, because that was my first date, Jamie. The boy that came to my house and brought me candy and flowers and took me to a movie and paid for everything and kissed me on the cheek afterwards. And no boy has ever lived up to that boy. Good for you, Patrick.
Shout out to Patrick.
Yeah.
Now,
my third grade boyfriend.
So Beetlejuice was a movie kind of about the afterlife and a very weird vision of it where if you commit suicide, you become a civil servant. But speaking of the afterlife and religion, want to talk about an insane religious zealot?
No.
Too bad.
Can I say no?
I got to steer this ship.
I guess I'm here for it. I don't want to be here for it.
Let's get toward the guy we're going to be talking about for the next 2 episodes. Are you familiar with a video game series called BioShock?
Heard and not played.
Yeah, BioShock, well, the original, created by a guy named Ken Levine, and the 2 BioShock games that he directly worked on are both sort of criticisms of different parts of American culture. So the first BioShock was about this underwater city created by uber-libertarians.
Ugh.
Yeah, and how it went horribly wrong and turned into, that's why it's a horror game.
It's like, wait, ugh.
And then BioShock Infinite is a criticism about other parts of America. But we'll get to that in a second. Heard about another little thing, a document called Project 2025.
Oh, God. Yeah, I know more about it than I want to. It gives me nightmares.
Yeah. So BioShock Infinite, the setting is a racist American theocracy called Columbia. It's literally this floating city, powered by weird science. And it's ruled by an old bigot named Comstock.
I have heard of this act.
So he was so patriotic and Christian that he left America to found his own society. But his name and charming personality were derived from an infamous real-world figure from 19th century American history, Anthony Comstock.
I already don't like it. Am I allowed to already not like it?
Yeah, you're fine to not like him. I mean, literally, he was the bad guy in a video game and connected to Project 2025. So I think going in, this is not going to be one of the good ones.
So, well, yeah, I mean, technically, I think he might be the bad guy now. I don't know.
You're about to find out. So welcome, everybody, to Chainsaw History. This is the podcast where my sister and I treat respected figures from American history with the same grace Philadelphia Eagles fans had for their city after they won the Super Bowl.
Oh, I'm here.
So let's light some cop cars on fire.
I am ready to light some cop cars.
Burn down a few buildings.
Let's do it.
I'm your host, Jamie Chambers, and this is my sister, Bambi.
Hello.
We are a comedy podcast. I'm not a historian, but I did read a bunch of books and articles while drinking an unhealthy number of Red Bulls.
Yeah, I'm here because I've been, I guess, forced. I don't know. I'm here. I'm here for it. I'm here for season whatever this is. Hooray.
So head over to chainsawhistory.com and click that logo in the center to find out how you can support us with either a paid subscription or a one-time tip. This is also where you can find the full back catalog, show notes with all the research I did for the episodes and all the other stuff we got going on. And soon we're going to have merch. We already have the first prototype logo shirts already kind of ready to go. I want to order us a couple to check them out.
Yeah, I want to order my shirt, and then you guys can see me in my shirt.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
Content warning. Today we're going to be talking about abortion, contraception, pornography, violence, and self-harm.
Woohoo!
Plus a healthy dose of modern American politics.
Oh, gross.
So if you're sensitive to these issues, you might want to skip this one.
Can I skip this one?
No.
But I'm sensitive.
The real Anthony Comstock was a self-appointed moral crusader of the late 19th and early 20th centuries who served as secretary for the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice and was a United States postal inspector with full authority to arrest people and even carry a firearm.
Oh,
so they gave this guy a gun and a badge.
So he's going to shoot you about your mail?
Yes.
Jesus fucking Christ.
He was so infamous that you can find the word Comstockery in the Merriam-Webster dictionary.
Ew.
Quote, Comstockery, noun. 1. Strict censorship of materials considered obscene. 2. Censorious opposition to alleged immorality, as in literature. Unquote.
Yeah, I hate it.
So literally, he hits his own word.
Yeah, fucking I hate it. Hate it.
Now, to be fair, the name Comstock cannot be directly found in Project 2025. Which, by the way, for anybody who hasn't heard about it over and over again recently, or is listening sometime in the future, Project 2025 is the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank. It's their guide for the next president whose name rhymes with rump. But to be even more fair, Comstock is referenced by statute. So look on page 594 of Project 2025's Mandate for Leadership, which I will now read in a Ben Shapiro-y kind of voice.
If I throw up.
Yeah, Kevin probably should have left you a bucket for this
Oh my
episode.
God.
So yes, we're going to read from Project 2025 now. Quote. Announcing a campaign to enforce the criminal prohibitions in 18 U.S. Code 1461 and 1462 against providers and distributors of abortion pills that use the mail. Federal law prohibits mailing every article, instrument, substance, drug, medicine, or thing which is advertised, described in a manner calculated to lead another or to use it to apply producing abortion. Following the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs, there is now no federal prohibition for the enforcement of this statute. The Department of Justice, the next conservative administration, should therefore announce its intent to enforce federal law against providers and distributors of such pills. Unquote.
Oh my God.
So that's word for word from Project 2025. Now, those two laws referenced, 18 U.S.C. 1461 and 1462, were part of a broader package that all the newspapers at the time called the Comstock Act.
Yeah, I have heard the Comstock.
And so that's
I've
usually
so heard conservative fucking pundit pieces of shit like Carrie Lake use the Comstock Act.
So the Comstock Act is referenced, but Comstock himself is largely forgotten. But we're now going to remind everybody who this was and if we should be listening to him, all these well over 100 years later.
I say no.
Yeah, good call. But let's talk about it anyway. So back then, we're going way back into the 19th century, they made it illegal to use the U.S. Postal Service to mail anything declared obscene, subject to,
Yeah, any
whatever
kind
that
of,
means.
Well, yeah, it literally could be a fucking woman showing her ankles 100 years ago. I mean, or wearing pants. That could be obscene. Fuck you.
It was that 70s Supreme Court case, I think, where somebody's like, well, I don't know, but I know it when I see it, as in there is no definition of obscenity. It's just purely opinion.
Yeah.
So in other words, Comstock Act makes it illegal to do anything obscene, as well as anything that can be used to perform an abortion or any document providing information about how to perform said procedure. And if that wasn't bad enough, many states adopted even stricter Comstock laws that made providing contraception or even information about how to prevent pregnancy also illegal. So if you literally just mail a piece of paper in the mail telling a woman how to not get pregnant, you could be arrested under these laws.
Well, yeah, because we're supposed to be nothing but baby machines.
All right, so does any of this sound familiar?
It sounds too familiar. I don't like it. It's a Brillo pad against my feminist little soul.
I'm going to show you a picture of Mr. Comstock, and so you can describe what he looks like for our listeners. This is today's hero.
Well, I mean, the good news is nobody wants to fuck this bald motherfucker, although his stash is epic. He is completely bald, but there is so much fucking hair
The epic mutton
on
chops.
his mutton chop face. And his chin is left, because it's like, I guess he has like a little cleft in his
like
chin.
bowling ball head.
He does, but it's like, whoop. It's almost like his face wants to smile, but he doesn't.
And if you want to have some fun, just search Comstock political cartoons, because the cartoonists today had fun with this guy.
Oh, I'm sure. And I'm sure they were like, you can't get it in the mail because it's super obscene.
And he was a hated figure by many, unless you were a super religious.
Well, and right now he's hated by many just in general. Anyone who's fucking invoked this act is an enemy of fucking women.
As described in an article published by Stanford University Press, quote,
you can say this on air if we want to, but, before you start quoting something, I think I need to hit my vape of weed.
As described in an article published by Stanford University Press, quote, Comstock was active throughout the end of the 19th century and into the 20th. He opposed women's suffrage, the dissemination of any information regarding birth control or abortion, and pornography or other obscene, lewd, or lascivious material. Thousands were arrested under the act, and Comstock himself boasted that 15 people were driven to suicide by his actions. Unquote.
Wow. Just wow. Yeah.
Opening
He's a super asshole.
description.
He's the enemy of women.
And especially in part 2, we will literally talk about specifically which women he went after and under the circumstances in which they killed themselves because of what a massive piece of shit he was.
Oh, goody.
But we're just in the summary portion right now. It took decades after his death for America to strip away, erode, or begin to ignore the Comstock laws. And now goons from the Heritage Foundation want to bring it all back to make America great again.
Well, yeah, they want to fucking take America back before women had goddamn rights.
Yeah, and then
And
roll it
fuck
back before the
that
end
shit.
of slavery,
Yeah, I mean, they really want to just roll it back 250 years because they are total fucking pieces of shit.
Allow me to suggest that perhaps these guys even want to go a step farther and really, really like that monarchy.
Stop it. I'm gonna throw up.
So
Gotta throw up.
I was reminded strongly of our old pal Matthew Hale when researching this story, and for more than one reason. And at least one of my sources would probably agree. From The American Mind in Action by O'Higgins and Reed. Quote, if he had lived in earlier Puritan days, he might easily have been a distinguished governing figure and a tower of righteousness in public life, though his name would probably have come down to us horribly associated with the cruelest excesses of the New England witch hunts. Unquote. So in other words, this guy had a very powerful personality. He clearly got a following, and in an earlier day, he would have done even better, but he also would have totally, hung or burned
Yeah,
women.
he would have burned women or and murdered
like
them.
Matthew Hale totally did.
If he would have been given the chance. Fuck this guy so hard.
Now, speaking of sources, there are plenty, and if you go to our website after this episode drops, you'll see the whole list, but let's just name a few up top. Anthony Comstock, Roundsman of the Lord, is both a biography and gleeful roast of the man written in the 1920s. This is only like 12 years after he died. A couple of dudes decided we need to just trash Comstock, and it is so good.
Okay, that sounds fun.
Yes, and it is it's public domain, so you can find this book freely available online, and it, like I said, it is written in delicious fashion. I had a lot of good quotes in this episode from Roundsman of the Lord. I also recommend Amy San's work, The Man Who Hated Women, which paints a picture of Comstock by focusing on the women he persecuted. So instead of making it all about him, she really highlights the work of all these women who were working at the time to provide health care to other women.
The women he tried to destroy.
Yeah. So she lifts them up, but also tells about how he ruined them or tried to. It depends on
which woman.
Each one is a case by case. But if you've ever heard of a lady named Margaret Sanger, Comstock, she was one of his big targets that we'll talk about in part 2.
I can't say I'm looking forward to it, but,
So, yeah, I know you're not looking forward to it, but we're going to go ahead and talk about this mutton-chopped mastodon of morality.
Ugh.
Let's get into it. So first we wind the clock all the way back to March 7th, 1844, and whoosh to the village of New Canaan in Fairfield County, Connecticut. The joyous day that Thomas and Polly Ann Comstock brought a bouncing baby boy into their growing family. Anthony Armstrong Comstock.
This is only the 40s?
Yes,
This asshole was in the 40s?
He was born in 1844. Anthony Armstrong Comstock. And to give you an idea about exactly where they live, they could literally see Long Island sitting in the water from their unpainted farmhouse.
Okay.
And it's only unpainted because of New England modesty, because they could totally have afforded to paint the house. Thomas, the dad, owned 2 sawmills that supplied lumber to nearby towns and had a successful farm that sat on 160 acres and employed about 30 guys at once.
Employed or owned?
No, employed.
Okay.
This is Massachusetts, or right before the Civil War, they were not cool with the whole slave thing.
All right. Just wanting to know.
And in fact, this is one area where Comstock's on the right side.
Okay.
And his whole family.
I was prepared to be like, fuck all these people, but okay, no.
This part was done. These were just workers. These were workers, people. Even though that's maybe the only charitable thing to say is they were actually employed. But
okay.
From Roundsman of the Lord, once again, which is a book dripping in delicious sarcasm, quote, this was an addition to the small force of conscripts, for Polly was the mother of 10 children, and 7 lived into maturity. Both Polly and Thomas were Puritan by direct descent. They came of a long-lived folk, deep-rooted in the soil of their native state. But Polly broke one tradition of her people, for she died when Anthony was 10 years old. Though she was not an old woman, her purposes in life had been completed. 10 she bore, and upon all those who lived. Polly set her imprint and perpetuated herself. They had the name of Comstock, but the look of Lockwood's, her maiden name. Unquote.
That's disgusting.
So-
How this poor woman, she birthed 10 children, and then they were like, and then her mission was complete,
you have
and
to
she
understand,
died.
he was literally going with the Comstock kind of viewpoint, so they were writing that with a sarcastic tone. Like, she had completed her mission life. They do not agree with anything to do with Comstock.
Okay.
So if you actually read the book, you'd understand that we're literally saying, yes, she had completed. It's like this tone of voice.
Yes.
You have to read the whole thing.
I'm sure that's how the fucking father felt or whatever.
Because the whole book is written.
She's good.
The whole book, Rounds of the Lore, is written as if it's praising Comstock, but it's done in this tone that lets you know that it is roasting him just joyously.
This woman bore 10 children and then just fucking died from it. That's, yeah.
Now, you might imagine a
So I'm assuming died in childbirth.
Yeah.
That's how most women die, was in childbirth.
I mean, she kept rolling the dice over and over again.
You know, these people didn't even fucking wash their hands, so...
So you might imagine a boy who loses his mom at only 10 years old might have some mommy issues. But Tony took his mommy issues to the next level and decided to inflict them on the rest of the world for the rest of his fucking life.
Oh, well, and if Republicans have their way for all eternity.
So the cause of death recorded for Polly was flooding, which was a euphemism for postpartum hemorrhaging.
Yeah, she fucking bled to death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he literally came home from school and his mother was dead. His mother had literally sacrificed her life to bring a child into the world, his little sister Harriet. And it was a choice she absolutely made because she was a loud and vocal opponent of all forms of birth control. She was hyper-religious and truly believed that it was her job to provide her husband as many little farm workers as she could produce before she bled to death.
Well, and you know, if that was her choice.
I mean, that's the thing. She literally...
That's fine.
You can say this wasn't like forced on her. She wanted to keep popping out babies.
Well, you know, that's her fucking...
So,
it's fine if it's your choice.
But
Continue.
It did have this incredible effect on Anthony. It's like we had to psychoanalyze him based on this. But so even though Polly was dead for 60-some years of his life, she cast this gigantic shadow over his whole story. According to Roundsman, once again, quote, when she had been dead for more than 50 years, he told an interviewer that the whole purpose of his life had been to honor the memory of Polly Lockwood Comstock. Before he was 10, he met the ideal woman. And when he married, he chose one who seemed not unlike her, unquote.
Yeah, them some mommy issues, dude. Yeah, you probably should have gotten help.
He went and found the woman who reminded him the most of his own dear departed saintly mother.
Jesus Christ. Well, you know, I could say that I did that with my dad. I found the guy who was the most chill and sort of the most like him in certain ways. I mean, the ways that I admired and appreciated it about him.
I mean, Freud, you know, explored that idea. He's certainly
but I certainly didn't want to fuck my dad. That's disgusting, Freud, you weirdo.
Yeah, agreed there. Even though it is very true that a lot of people do seek at least the positive qualities that they remember from, you know,
sometimes
like
the
that.
negative.
Sometimes
Jamie.
the negative. So because of what a big deal Polly Comstock was on him, we're going to take a minute to talk about her before we move on to the rest of his life, because she is the ghost of Polly Comstock, you know, hangs around.
Jesus Christ. I don't even know what to say about that.
So let's see what Mom's influence on little Tony was, since it will definitely inform his later antics. Charles Trumbull wrote a sloppy blowjob of a biography late in Comstock's life. So while he was still around, Comstock had this friend of his, possibly even paid him to write this very glowing biography. And it's the title is Comstock, Fighter. In it, he describes the kids' weekends with Mom. Quote, Sunday was no bugbear in that home. She would gather the children round her, close up, and tell them stories. These stories were often from the Bible, sometimes from other sources, but always they were stories of moral heroism. That was one thing she instilled into the minds and hearts and breath and blood of her children, until it became, for at least one of those children, the great outstanding essential in character and manhood. Purity, principle, duty were watchwords often on the mother's lips. Expediency and policy, never. Now, it goes on a little bit more and more about how amazing her teaching was, and then we pick back up again. Harking back to his mother again, he says with earnestness, I'm not entitled to much credit if I stand out against some things in a way that makes people characterize me as puritanical. I cannot feel that the teachings of my mother are vastly superior to anything my opponents can offer or recommend. Unquote. So in other words, all these years later, it's like, no matter what things people had to say to him or why he was hurting people or doing something wrong, he's like, no, I'm just following what my mother taught me.
Yeah,
Like
dude.
when he's like 70.
Dude, maybe you shouldn't have to take everything so literal.
Now, Polly taught Tony a little poem that he'd recite for the rest of his life. Build it well, whate'er you do. Build it straight and strong and true. Build it high and clean and broad. Build it for the eye of God.
Okay.
That's how he's like chanting this in his head all the time as he goes about his business.
I mean, there's nothing even wrong with that.
Yeah,
you just don't have to be a fucking weirdo.
Yeah, he has a real problem with that.
The problem.
You're gonna find out he has a real problem with that without being a fucking weirdo. This guy.
That is the problem of religious nut bars. Is they have a real issue of being fucking issues of being a weirdo.
You're gonna detect some J.D. Vance levels of weirdness
here.
Well,
I'm sure that he fucking jacks off to this dude at night. That fucking.
We're gonna get into that.
I hate him. I hate him so much.
All right. So while it's almost all positive, it does appear that his mother wasn't pleased with the influence of other kids or the hired farmhands that had on young Tony. You can imagine these rough worker guys hanging out at the farm, cussing and talking about women, and they're drinking and smoking on their breaks. And
yeah, I mean, he was like,
and he was a growing farm boy in a big ass family.
Oh no, he might have secular.
Well, and once again, remember, she died. This is how she's feeling before he's even 10, because she's gone after this.
A little boy. She was just trying to protect her little boy. I'm sure she didn't mean for him to be a fucking nut job.
It's like, I don't want my 9-year-old smoking Marlboros. It's like, that's
cool.
Reasonable. So continuing from Comstock, Fighter by Trumbull, quote, while the boy's childhood days were chiefly filled with things that make for good, there were vicious characters in school and on the farm, some of the hired help being abundantly so, which were a great sorrow to the mother. Mr. Comstock bears testimony to the common experience of many when he says that certain things that were brought into his life in those boyhood days started memories and lines of temptation that are harder for him to overcome than anything that ever came into his life in later years. Unquote. Certain things.
Certain things.
We don't know what those certain things are, but we can have some guesses.
Jesus Christ. He was like, I can't handle any kind of pornography.
As like 8 or 9 years old, certain things were introduced into his life that fucked with him for the rest of his life. But it's never said out loud. We have to puzzle piece this together as we go. This is definitely not the last time we'll hear about Tony succumbing to temptation. Being a good New England Puritan, Polly instilled in Tony a preference for simple church services focusing on the repentance of sin. And after she died, he could only worry about his own mortality and the state of his own soul. From Roundsman, quote, it was a wintry faith in which Anthony Comstock was nurtured. The threat of hellfire crackled within, and outside was the bitter wind. 4 times every Sabbath he heard the dread tale of damnation before he returned home to eat his pie and milk and sleep upon the promise of a searing fire which should be everlasting. Perhaps with brain and belly crammed, he sometimes dreamt and cried out in the night for Polly. Whether or not she came for him, it would be hard to say, for like God, she had many children. Unquote. That was harsh. These guys really hated him. Making fun of him for crying for his mom. 10 years old. I don't know if even I could go there. It's a shame that Comstock's diaries and personal letters have been lost. But thankfully, we got some juicy excerpts from the book Roundsman of the Lord, because they're the last ones who had access to his personal documents. Now, one journal from 1871 gives us a warning. Quote, to anyone finding this book out of my possession, it contains nobody's business but my own, and no one should meddle or read therein unless I invite them to do so, and then should go no farther. Unquote.
Ooh, he didn't want his personal...
Yeah, baby. Tony Comstock thinks we should respect his privacy.
Oh, okay.
And I think we should respect it just as much as he did to the many, many people whose lives he gleefully ruined.
Yeah, no, fuck that. I literally hope his diaries were printed, you piece of shit.
Yeah, well, the sad news is the diaries were lost.
And then sent through the mail.
The diaries were lost, but not only did Roundsman of the Lord quote them, they literally reproduced in his own handwriting a number of sections. So you can literally see his bad spelling and shitty handwriting for yourself if you want.
I don't like this guy. Continue.
So we're going to ignore his warning, and I'm going to read a bunch of stuff from his diary in this episode.
Fuck this guy.
Exactly. Like any good New England farm boy, Tony's days started at 4 o'clock in the goddamn morning to feed livestock, chop wood, and go about other wholesome farm chores, in the middle of the damn night. But he got to escape backbreaking labor so he could walk half a mile to school. And we know from quotes related to his mother's shame that the boys at school were somehow bad influences on Tony. And apparently he got in trouble all the damn time. Trumbull's biography describes him receiving, quote, plenty of lickings that he undoubtedly deserved, unquote. And like any good country boy, he had to pick his own switch. But he would cut a little notch in it so it would break if the teacher hit him too hard. Unfortunately for Tony, there was a far worse punishment.
I hope he got switched a lot.
Quote, more humiliating was being sit over to sit with the girls while wearing a sunbonnet all the while, unquote.
That's probably not good for him.
And to drive home the shame was a focus on Puritan values and a hefty dose of church. On Sundays, Thomas would fill a wagon with kids and farm workers and head to the Congregational Church. There would be a morning preaching service, Sunday school, a congregational lunch in the horse sheds, then a nice long afternoon preaching service before everyone headed home.
Except for that last part, I feel like I've lived that Sunday many times.
We've been there.
Yeah. Church is an all goddamn day affair.
Yeah. Now, one Comstock always stayed home on Sundays to cook dinner for everyone else who would be coming home, and regardless of gender. So Tony is on record as being proud to have prepared some of the family meals. So that's one weird area where he's not an official thing. So, and he could cook. Again from Trumbull, quote, in the evening, some would frequently go back to the closing church service of the day, returning to be refreshed with pie and milk. So it's like three services wasn't enough. We got to have 4. Daily prayers were conducted every morning before breakfast, and the hired men and servants, as well as the family, were expected to be present. Unquote.
Sounds fun.
Yay! I love going to work and immediately having to go to a prayer circle.
Yeah. And heaven forbid, some of these people might have a good time in their spare time.
Can't have that. Now, when you're not at church, Bambi, the dark forces of Satan himself are waiting to tempt you around every corner, as we learned with the Matthew Hale story.
I mean, yeah.
So even though we're told he engaged in wholesome games of tag, quoits, which was like ring toss, and stickball, it was liquid vice that first called to Tony. So one night he was going about his nightly farm chores, which in this case was driving the cows in from the pasture. And doing so involved walking past the house of this old friend of his. We don't have his name, but we'll call him Chad. And Tony wasn't supposed to go over to Chad's house anymore because he was one of those bad influence kids.
He's a bad kid.
But of course, Tony stopped by Chad's place anyway. And Chad pulled out a jug of homemade hooch and the boys hung out and got shit-faced. Like you do.
Yeah, like you do. Sounds
the most normal thing we've heard so far.
He was a teenager that got shit-faced with a friend. That's completely normal.
Yeah.
Hell, I had a margarita last night. 0 regrets.
From Comstock, fighter. Anthony felt somewhat hilarious that evening at home and was glad to get to bed. The next morning he had quite a head when he woke up, but he got up and he and his father retired to the cow shed. That was the only time he remembers ever having drunk liquor as a beverage in his life. The reformation was quick, drastic, complete, unquote.
So it gave him a really bad day and he was like, no, I'm not doing this again.
No, yeah, he got drunk, passed out, woke up with a massive hangover, and then his dad kicked the shit out. I mean, he brought him behind the shed. You know what that means in the South.
Yeah, I mean, as one does, but that's... See, again, all that seems normal. He should have just continued on with his fucking life instead of being a weirdo. But whatever.
So now we're going to see how all this stuff has an effect on him.
This is the most normal thing that I've heard so far.
So now the idea is to draw a line from this incident to things he does in the future. Now,
so instead of just being like, hey, I had a normal fucking life experience, he was just like, oh my God, now I need to prevent everyone on the planet from drinking liquor.
This can't happen to anyone. All right, so... Now, Tony had moved out on his own by the time he was 18 years old in 1862, and he was working as a clerk in a country store in Winnepock, Connecticut. And this is when he first took action to save others. An Irish customer ran into the store screaming about a mad dog roaming around town that would be biting the children. And to be fair, a rabid dog in the 19th century is especially bad news. Like, legit, that has to be put down to
we need to find that fucking dog and and destroy
So
it.
this isn't a criticism. So 18-year-old Tony, told the guy to watch the store, grabbed a rifle and a pistol, and set out on the hunt. He asked other young men in the village to join him, but only he had the intestinal fortitude.
Yeah, because they didn't want to get bit by a rabid dog.
Now, as he continued his investigation, Tony learned the dog was a foaming-at-the-mouth mastiff that belonged to a local saloon owner.
Oh, Jesus.
So
That's a big-ass dog.
Tony tracked the dog down and gave it the old Christy Gnome. Body shot with the rifle and a pistol to the head.
And he said, I hated that dog. Yeah. And then went back to his life.
And while putting down a dangerous animal is necessary, killing it didn't satisfy the anger Tony felt. And what's not necessary is what he does next. So the local saloon owner had a kind of a reputation. The reputation for trading groceries for booze. Booze, Bambi. The thing his father beat the shit out of him over. And the rumors even said he did it with women and children.
He let women and children drink booze?
They'd trade him eggs, he'd give him whiskey.
Okay.
Well, clearly you're not thinking like Tony Comstock.
Yeah, clearly.
So Tony spied on the place and then snitched him out to the sheriff, who took exactly zero action.
Yeah, he was like, and fuck you.
Well, the problem is, like, even if there, it's like, even if like
Yeah.
a legitimate law being broken, who's going to rat the guy out?
Yeah.
Like
It's
everybody
like,
else is
oh.
like, yeah, we're going to rat out the only bar in town who just trades with us.
Not to mention, I'm a kid from the 80s. It's like your parents sent you in for cigarettes kind of shit.
Yeah.
Nobody gave a flying fuck.
So, yeah.
And that was the 1980s.
Yeah, how do you know that those kids and wife weren't just getting it for dad back home, which is what they probably
were doing.
Even though I can't blame, some kid in the 19th century if he
It was like wanted to take a couple sips before handing it over to dad. Most fucking dads would pat you on the head and be like, it'll put hair on your chest.
So Comstock is all pissed because the sheriff wouldn't do anything, and he stews for a while. At some point later, the place was sold to some New Yorkers who set it up as a gambling hall and gin mill and cheerfully didn't give a shit about their lack of a liquor license or gambling permit. So enraged, Tony decided it was time to go full Batman on these guys.
Jesus Christ.
He went undercover, asking the owners if they had any apples to sell him for the village store, but he was secretly casing the place. A few nights later, he ninja'd his way in and opened every faucet to drain out all the evil booze onto the floor. Then he pinned up a notice stating the place was now closed, and that if they reopened, the entire building was coming down.
What a piece of shit. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Fuck this guy.
Apparently, the New Yorkers cut their losses and left town since they didn't know who the culprit was, and they couldn't get a legal remedy since they were running a very illegal business. So he ran out the only bar in town.
And then all the villagers were sad. And everybody hated him.
Yeah, everyone hating him is going to be a running theme in his
I'm
entire
sure.
life. Comstock is recorded as saying, "And that was the only temperance lecture I ever delivered in that town, though I was a member of the Sons of Temperance." Unquote. A local wife made conversation with Tony at the store, and he learned that with the dive bar closed down, her husband quit drinking and was now able to keep a steady job. So Tony had not only fought evil and won, he'd saved a family.
Ooh.
He's a fucking hero.
Yeah, fuck this guy. Ugh.
He's the saddest Batman. And he's
the worst Batman.
And he's just getting started.
It's like we got the best Wolverine, but sadly, the worst of this asshole.
Now, sometime around 1860, Thomas Comstock, that's the dad, had moved to Birmingham. Not Alabama, but England, to pursue a business deal that did not work out, but where he would nonetheless live for the next 20 years, including a second marriage and 4 more children. Total of 14 for Comstock Sr.
Well, I mean, he needed a second wife because he had 10 children. It would be way hard.
Except he kept that wife in England and never brought her back. So it had nothing to do with his older kids, who were all living on their own and with relatives
they were all
and
like,
shit
okay.
Anyway. He essentially abandoned the.
He abandoned the
He didn't
family.
abandon everything because like the farm and all this other stuff he left behind. But in terms of being personally around, he's like, I did my bit.
Yeah.
He went off to do something else for a long time.
I mean, honestly, if I were around that kid, I'd want to peace out. Be like, do your thing, dude. I'm out.
So this is what's going on now. So all this time, tensions are building toward the outbreak of the Civil War, and the family farm was mortgaged and the title held by Southern sympathizers. Apparently, these folks threatened to foreclose on the farm if anyone in the Comstock family enlisted in the Union Army. But Tony's older brother Samuel really wanted to shoot some rebels, so he joined up anyway, and the dudes made good. So long, family farm.
Well, I mean,
Principle is their thing, and every once in a while, their principles are on the correct ones. At least Samuel's.
I was about to say, it's like, so the brother wasn't a weirdo. He seemed like he had conviction.
Well, Tony is going to,
or maybe he just wanted to murder people. I don't know.
Tony is going to follow him to fight on the Union side, but
well, I mean, at that point, what was the point? Not. I mean, if the family farm's lost for one, they might as well. I'll just say fuck it.
So, unfortunately, Samuel decided to volunteer for combat duty right before the Battle of Gettysburg.
Yikes!
Not a good one.
Well, unfortunately, he lives.
From Trumbull. Now, this is Samuel, not Tony. This is the older brother.
Oh.
Quote, in the first day's engagement at the Battle of Gettysburg on Barlow's Knoll, Samuel received his death wound. He lived through weeks of suffering, wasting away from 180 pounds in weight to less than 100, and he died in a field hospital. His army comrade, Justice M. Silliman, told the grief-stricken younger brother, that's Tony, that the brave soldier's last words in that rough field hospital were, Jesus can make a dying bed feel soft as downy pillows are. And then he fell asleep. His name is cut in a monument at Gettysburg today. Unquote.
R.I.P. Samuel.
Samuel, joined the Civil War, was in it for a little bit, and then died at Gettysburg, or after getting wounded at Gettysburg.
He died on the right side of it. That's cool.
Yeah.
Good for you, dude.
I don't see anything bad about Samuel in anything I saw.
Yeah, whatever.
So at 19 years old, Tony enlisted as a private and joined the 17th, his dead brother's regiment, on Folly Island, South Carolina. And one of the first things he noticed after joining up was that they had no chaplain and no religious services.
Yeah, because they were in the middle of a fucking war zone, you piece of shit. But continue.
This ain't going to fly with Tony. So he started a worship group, at first just consisting of a few fellow Jesus-minded soldiers, which is, fine.
That's fine.
Now, Tony needed to keep his mind on God because all his fellow enlisted men were constantly drinking and smoking. Vices which, Tony had
as you do, especially in a goddamn war zone.
And if you're a Union soldier in the Civil War, whiskey was part of your rations.
As they should be.
Tony made sure everyone saw him pour out his own personal supply rather than share it with anyone else.
So everybody thought he was a piece of shit.
Yeah, his loving biographer tells us that pouring out the whiskey treated Tony to a few rounds of vigorous abuse from his fellow soldiers, a.k.a. he got the shit kicked out of him a few times for being a stingy, uptight asshole.
Yeah, I'm sure. As one, you know what? I'm on the side of the people who kicked his ass.
Tony would record bitter entries in his diary, all with his horrendous spelling, with entries like this. Quote, March 9th. Heard some persons speaking against me. Don't know the reason. Tried hard to do my duty. Will not join them in sin and wickedness, though lose all of their friendship. For Jesus is more precious than all the world. This, I fear, is the reason of their hatred and jealousy. Unquote.
Just wait till they find hookers.
He also must have been insufferable to live with.
You don't fucking say.
He once recorded this about his tent mate. Quote, Charlie became offended at me and threatened to leave my tent because I worked too hard. Unquote.
Yeah, sleep, motherfucker. Why don't you just shut the fuck up and sleep? I'm sure. It's like, do your prayers have to be out loud, you dick?
Now, here's one for you to chew on, Bambi. Tell me what you think about this one, dated May 30th. Quote, commence teaching the 6 colored soldiers to spell. Methinks the most skeptical would be convinced they can be taught, and the most rabid can confess that they are above the beast. Could they but see the spirit with which they study. Their perseverance and patience far surpasses many white people. Oh, what pleasure do I take in teaching the downtrodden of our land. Were I a prophet, I would predict for them, some of them, a future as noble and as honorable as the whitest of our land. How true are their words when they say, the white men made us thus. Unquote.
Okay, so he's on the right side for now?
Kind of, but he's also being super weird and condescending.
Yeah, he's being really weird about it, and they're rabid? What the fuck?
He's talking about, he's saying the most... It's kind of weird. Like I said, it's kind
of
hard to pin down what he's saying because he's sort of praising them, but in this sort of racist, weird way
and bizarre way.
Yeah, how true are their words when they say, I assume the black men, the white men made it, whatever. I don't get it. It's worth noting that many of the stories Comstock told his biographer when he was an old man don't appear at all in his diaries. So in other words, he probably made most of that shit up. Those stories are usually tales about how he won people over to friendship after they initially hated his guts, or how his avoidance of booze and smoke made him a stronger and healthier than all the other soldiers.
Yeah, that's
Which
bullshit.
is not only contradicted by his journal entries, but his record of illness throughout his military service. He was constantly getting sick, and, there was nothing
As one does
and
in
other
the
than that-
fucking Civil War.
Yeah, his service otherwise just seems unremarkable.
Yeah, and I'm sure nobody liked him. They all thought he was a piece of shit.
Yeah, he only got shot at a few times and found he was not keen on it, which is a normal thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not keen on getting shot at.
Yeah. Tony's journal showed he kept a record of how many letters he sent out to friends and family versus how many he received, and it was not a favorable ratio.
I mean, I'm a firm believer that you don't have to be a piece of shit to be a Christian. That's a choice.
It's been tried. Notes show he gave out personal loans that no one ever paid back.
Okay.
So I'm like...
I would, yeah. People were like, give me money, you piece of shit.
He's like, maybe I'll get a friend. Nope.
No. Will you be my friend? No, no one wants to be your friend. You suck. No, Dilbert. Nobody wants to be your friend.
Dilbert wasn't loudly praying all the time. So, down in Florida, his duties were peaceful, and he began working for a group helping desperate people and handing out religious material to soldiers and civilians alike. He did this work for the organization that would entangle him for the rest of his life. A group that will always live in legend thanks to the Village People. That's right, I'm talking about the place where they have everything for young men to enjoy, where you can hang out with all the boys.
The YMCA.
The Young Men's Christian Association. Yep, the YMCA is a big part of Comstock's story, even though we'll get more, most of that will be in part 2. But all it did at this point was further sour him with his fellow soldiers because the Y was not popular during the Civil War. Tony continued to piss people off by not allowing the church he'd established to be used after hours for revelry. So he's like, no, you can't party in our...
Heaven forbid anyone have a good goddamn time, but whatever.
Exactly. As recorded in his diary, quote, December 2nd, seems to be a feeling of hatred from some of the boys, constantly falsifying, persecuting, and trying me to do harm. Can I sacrifice principle and conscience for praise of man? Never. Unquote.
You could just shut the fuck up. I mean, have you tried it?
Or try being cool for 1 second of your goddamn life.
Or just not even just cool, just chill.
Yeah.
We'll settle for
Settle
chill.
down.
Just, okay, you're at a 15, you need to take it to an 8.
So a few weeks later, someone trashed his room.
Good. I'm with those assholes.
Quote, December 20th, moved up into a room all by myself. After meeting, went to go into room. All windows were closed tight. Room full of smoke. Bunk full of rubbish and loaded with broken benches, chairs, etc. Boys were initiating me. Had good laugh. Unquote.
I'm having a good laugh now, too. I was alone.
Everyone hated you.
I was all by myself.
My room was on fire. So his work as a religious busybody and snitch intensified thanks to what he was doing for the YMCA. He writes in his diary wishing he had more authority to stop the advance of Satan in the army camp. And on July 18th, 1864, he made the first of what would be many arrests in his life, recording that he took the prisoner up to the guardhouse to be whipped, which he probably liked quite a bit.
What a piece of shit.
Because arresting people becomes one of his favoriteest things to do.
I'm sure, because he's not allowed to murder them.
But booze and dancing and smoking weren't the true enemy. Throughout his Civil War diary, Tony wrote entries like this one. Let's see what you think about a few of these. Quote, again tempted and found wanting. Sin, sin. Oh, how much peace and happiness is sacrificed on thy altar. Seemed as though devil had full sway over me today. Went right into temptation and then, oh, such love. Jesus snatched it away out of my reach. How good is he? How sinful am I? I am the chief of sinners, but I should be so miserable and wretched were it not that God is merciful and I might be forgiven. Glory be to God in the highest. Unquote.
What are you being tempted with, my dude?
Let's try this one. Quote, today Satan sorely tried me, yet by God's grace did not yield. Unquote. Or perhaps this one, quote, "This morning we're severely tempted by Satan, and after some time in my own weakness, I failed," unquote.
I was alone.
I was all by myself. Yep, I guess he wanted to record his failures to fuel his endless shame, but for us, it means he kept a jerk-off journal.
That's so weird.
We get to know every time he tugged it for that whole year.
Well, you know. Oh, God. What's the name of that fucking... Mike Johnson. It's like we can know his jack-off journal, too.
Jesus.
Oh, somebody just needs to hack that website. Gross. Do you want to know how many times your son jerks off, Jamie?
But we'll take a break from masturbation for a second, because on November 9th, he confessed an oddly specific sin. Quote, "Spent part of day foolishly as I look back. Read a novel part through." Unquote.
Ooh, you read a novel.
Roundsman of the Lord adds delicious commentary. Quote, "In justice to Comstock, it should be said that this seems the only time during his entire year of army life at which he yielded to this particular form of folly." Unquote. It's the only time he read a fucking book.
He read a fucking book and he was like, I have nothing but regrets.
Sinful waste of my time.
You know, granted, I've read a couple books.
Sure.
I have thrown a book across the room and been like, no more Satan. But yeah.
And before we take a break from making fun of Tony's diary entries, let's talk about one of the few times he seems moved by beauty. In this case, it was a moonlit night on October 12th, 1864. Quote, "This evening is one of nature's choicest. Horizon unspotted with cloud. Moon lavishing upon earth its purest crystal ray of light. Stood on barracks, looked off over ocean, as it lay basking in moonlight's silvery rays. How grand the sight! Beautiful indeed." Unquote.
Oh my God. He was like in the middle of a war zone and actually had like a moment of appreciation.
A normal thing, yeah. An actual...
He had a normal fucking reaction to a thing. I'm so proud of you, you piece of shit.
But...
But there's a
Comstock
side.
couldn't even take in the beauty of creation without feeling the fires of hell licking his boots. So he later added a postscript below his admiration of the moon. Quote, "What glory for earth, but it is not to be compared to that which is revealed in the last day. There's more glory and beauty, and all peace, joy, rest, and happiness. What is here to keep us here compared to it?" Unquote.
So basically at this point, he's just like, just shoot me.
He
I'm
felt...
so sick of the fucking army. I'd rather be dead, please, Jesus.
Well, so it's more like he's so religiously weird that, like,
heaven forbid he enjoy a thing.
He enjoyed a thing but wasn't thinking about God and then felt guilty about it. He couldn't even enjoy a moonlit night on the fucking beach without feeling like, oh God, I wasn't praising Jesus at that moment.
He wasn't praying out loud like a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Whatever. Ugh.
So...
This is not a normal person.
So, considering we talked semi-recently about the musical Hamilton, just like that character, Tony was all, after the war I went back to New York, except in this case, he was going to New York for the first time. And I don't think I can improve on Amy San's summary of Tony's immediate post-war life, so we'll let her tell it. From The Man Who Hated Women, quote, "After mustering out on July 19th, 1865, he moved to New Haven and took a job as a grocery store clerk. The family farm had been foreclosed, and his father had remarried and moved to London. Comstock briefly worked as an outdoor superintendent at a Christian school in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Hey, where Dad was born.
Okay.
But became sick and returned to the Northeast. Staying with his brother Chester in New Canaan, he held a string of dead-end jobs, dreaming of opening his own grocery store. But he had no savings. In Norwalk, one day in 1867, so he's 23 years old right now, he ran into a relative of his mother, as a banker named M. Legrand Blockwood. Comstock replied that he had no money and no friends.
Well, yeah. Nobody likes me because I'm a piece of shit.
So this relative, back to the quote, Lockwood gave him $5 and said, "Go to New York and find something to do." Comstock arrived at New York's City Hall a few days later with $3.45 in his pocket, unquote.
Okay. Yeah, here's some money. Do something with yourself. Don't be a piece of shit. And he was
Leave.
like, okay.
But this was
yeah, you need to get the fuck out of here.
But this was an auspicious thing because he goes to New York, and that is indeed where he makes it big. He lives the Frank Sinatra dream, but in the worst way ever.
He lives the not Frank Sinatra dream. Frank Sinatra's terrible hellscape.
Yep. So Tony was in Lower Manhattan with a couple of bucks in his pocket and surrounded by the dizzying variety of human beings and just stuff going on all around him. You can imagine how it all must have seemed to this guy with the worldview Tony Comstock had. So, peppered among all of the Comstock-approved legit businesses, this quote's again from Amy San, quote, peddlers hawked rubber goods, as in sex toys and contraceptives, dirty carte la vista, or calling cards at $0.25 each, dirty playing cards, watches, and brothel guides. Smut was not just ubiquitous, it was public, unquote.
Ooh, public smut. But New York is kind of known for that,
yeah.
So.
A lot of the porn was the kind of stuff easy to hide and even keep on your person. Pamphlets the size of small postcards. Tracts describing and illustrating all kinds of sex acts. There were nude and full XXX photos that you could just slip into a pocket. There were first-person narratives written by, totally not real, horny women describing in aching detail just how starved they were for sex, and they were definitely written by men. The stereoscope allowed people to look at semi-3D porn photos. There were multiple horny periodicals available on the street, and even mainstream newspapers ran ads for birth control and abortion. And every paper ran classified ads slyly offering pretty much anything you can imagine.
I just want to finish it with New York,
yeah.
New York. Because, yeah, it's like so far.
Start spreading the news.
Frank's happy so far.
There's porn here today.
Yep. Everybody's having a good time.
Yep. So Tony scored a room at a cheap boarding house while he set about looking for a job. Amy San relates a quote describing the experience of a young man showing up in New York City for the first time. So this is just some generic...
Just a dude.
This is some generic guy describing being in New York at the time in the late 19th century. Inexperienced men flock here in thousands from all parts of the country, leave friends and relatives behind. Their first acquaintance is a boarding house or dissipated young men and diseased furniture. After tea, the question goes around all the young men. Well, Harry, what are you going to do with yourself tonight? I'll play you billiards for drinks. Where are you going, Jack? I'm for the opera. Well, come take a drink before you go. One is going to see his little milliner, which is apparently someone who makes and sells hats, in Houston Street. Another to play bagatelle table game for lager. Others to play faro card game, particularly if it was payday. Some to have a show at cards. Some down to Madame Vonderbush's to see if she has any fresh immigrant girls.
Gross.
I gotta take a pause here. Madame Vonderbush. Literally Mrs. Wonderbush.
That is amazing. That is a great madam
that
name.
one snuck right up on me. So
Immigrant girls. So yeah, it's like some fresh prostitutes. Not ones that have been there for a long time. Not the old diseased ones.
It also talked about how it was cheaper for these men to go out and party at night than it was to heat their rooms at night. So until they were literally going to bundle up under the covers, they just stayed out drinking and partying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Seems normal. All these people, they were like, yeah, I'm going to go do shit.
So that was a description.
Even one of them was like, I'm going to go buy a hat.
That was the description of what normal poor young men were doing living in these boarding houses.
Yeah.
Understand, this is the kind of place Tony just rented a room in.
Oh my God. So he hates this more than anything. Yeah. They were like, we're going to have to shove this guy in the attic and board him up.
Yeah, the world's oldest profession was well represented in New York, of course, still is. There were many brothels, waiter girls in bars. Now, they were the ones who would...
But Wonderbush is definitely the favorite.
You really got to head to Mrs. Wonderbush. The waiter girls worked in bars. Now, they would convince men to drink, and they were literally earning a commission off of drink sales. But also, there was a side room so they could sell sex work, just a quickie off in the side room. Streetwalkers hustling outside as best they could. And this is the late 19th century, so sex work is maybe at its most dangerous of all time. So we're talking risks of arrest, unwanted pregnancy, STIs, violence, zero legal protection, whatsoever. Now, with many people having sex for anything but making babies, there was a booming industry of contraception, where a few decades past Charles Goodyear's invention of vulcanized rubber, so condoms were readily available, along with all kinds of devices and syringes and swabs and treatments. Women had been using syringes for personal hygiene and birth control since like 1820 by this point, so it's like a well-established, normal thing. Of course, if contraception failed, women who didn't want to be pregnant found they also had options: pills, powders, oils, and elixirs. And if all else failed, a surgical solution was available for about $10, which is about $220 in today's money.
Okay.
And it was legal in most states up to the moment of quickening, when you can feel fetal movement, and was not difficult at all to obtain. And even then, an abortion post-quickening was almost always a misdemeanor, and depending on what state and local area you were in.
Yeah, and and it must be really hard to prosecute something that could also just happened naturally.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And that's the thing. So all this is going on when Tony's taking
all this is
in.
going on. Oh my God.
Yes.
Clutch my chest and my pearls.
This was the New York City of the late 1860s. This was the Big Apple in which Tony Comstock and the YMCA would begin their holy war, which we're going to talk about in part 2.
Joy.
So here we are. Now that Comstock has hit the Big Apple, he's going to make it big, head to Washington, and change our country for the worse, and somehow continues to fuck with us to this very day.
Which is disgusting and weird and wrong.
And also next week we're going to focus on some of the biggest cases of Comstock trying to put high-profile women providing medical services for other women in prison.
Goody gumdrops.
Yep. But that's for next time. For now, thank you everybody for listening, sticking with us for yet another piece of shit.
Oh my God.
And thank you to Kevin.
Always, Raven Sound Studios. I'm so happy to be home.
Yeah, we haven't. It's been a few months since we've been in these chairs.
Yeah, Jamie, for the first time we went on hiatus and it was scheduled. It wasn't an emergency. We actually were like, hey, it's summer, we have things to do. Not, oh my God, somebody's dying.
But we still at least had a few episodes come out over the summer.
We did.
Speaking of which, if you want to hear those, go to chainsawhistory.com where you can find the whole back catalog. Click that logo in the middle and you will see links if you want to provide us support with a continuing subscription or just want to throw a one-time tip in the tip jar. We have to pay to host the show. I buy books and have certain services I use to help keep us going. So we haven't even quite made our base cost yet before we even talk about me and Bambi buying beer and weed.
I have to buy my own weed.
So, and another thing you can do is go and rate and review us, especially on Apple Podcasts, but any podcast service your choice, and go to YouTube, look for Chainsaw History Pod, the channel, and you can see our whole back catalog and a bunch of fun little short videos, including ones we'll do for this episode.
All right, that's it.
We've also got a charity to talk about.
Oh, do we?
Well, I do, at least. So, for my charity this week, I can't think of a better organization to support than Planned Parenthood that provides education and support services for sexual and gender-related health. So learn all the ways they assist men, women, and families and consider donating at plannedparenthood.org.
I agree with that one.
And especially after Comstock, that just seemed like the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the only way. I guess unless you also want to say go for Act Blue. So we don't have to deal with this. You can make a donation there.
Yeah, and anything that goes against the people who want to support Comstock's policies, then probably vote for them. But, and no matter what, get out there. Don't just sit around bitching. Get involved, at least vote.
Yeah, do something.
And don't be a Comstock. Stay out of other
people's lives. Don't be a Comstock, because if we're going to change it to a verb or whatever, don't be a Comstock.
Yeah, if you don't like abortions, don't have one. It's that easy, everybody.
Yeah, don't pour out everyone else's booze.
It's time to go drink and watch pornography in honor of Anthony Comstock.
Yeah, something. I'm going to handle my vice with my weed. Later.
Indeed. See you, everybody.
Oh.